Welcome everyone to the 27th webinar in the Governing for Reform in Aged Care webinar series titled How Partnering with Older People Can Add Value to Your Organisation. My name is Nicki Doyle and it is my pleasure to be your host today. I would like to start by acknowledging and pay my respects to the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we are meeting upon today. For me, I am on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to country. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending from other areas of Australia today. As our understanding of what person-centred care means within aged care services and takes shape, it is time for us to turn our attention to what delivering person-centred care means for governing bodies and executives. The challenge is to broaden our thinking about the benefits of establishing authentic and partnerships with older Australians receiving services. Our panel today will discuss their experiences as leaders and unpack some of the challenges and opportunities that surround incorporating consumer voice into strategic decision-making, including how they have reframed their thinking to incorporate a person-centred approach. I'm delighted today to be joined by our guest panellists, Professor John McCallum, Emma Bennison and Sharon Blackburn, all of whom I'm very excited to have the opportunity to talk to, and I will introduce each of them more formally in a little while. Before we get started, I'm conscious that while many of you joining us today have been participating in the Governing for Reform in Aged Care program for some time, others are very new to the program. Within the slides that are on the screen today, you will find more information and a link to explore further details and opportunities to be involved in other parts of the program. Some of the resources from Governing for Reform in Aged Care that you might like to access are directly linked to today's webinar, include webinars, podcasts and modules, and these are highlighted on the screen. We're also really keen to make today an engaging discussion. We would love to have questions from the audience. And if you would like to submit a question for the panel, please do so in the question and answers box on your screen. We will aim to select a few questions throughout the discussion for the panel members as time allows. So please feel free to start adding your questions now. I would now like you to join me in welcoming our wonderful panellists for today. So starting with Professor John McCallum. So John has 50 years of experience in research, policy and community activism in ageing and has been recognised as a leader in ageing policy and research since the 1970s. He continues to advocate for ageing and aged care issues and has been appointed as a foundation member of the Australian Council of Elders. John's last role before retiring in 2023 was as the CEO of National Seniors Australia. Under his leadership, National Seniors built a reputation for relevant, practical research into older Australians' lives and sentiments, which has contributed extensively to the Aged Care Royal Commission. John is a widely published academic leader in health and ageing based on groundbreaking research. He held senior leadership, teaching and research roles at Australian universities and internationally, with a focus on the Pacific, including Japan, the Philippines, the USA and China. John also received the Centenary Medal in 2001 for outstanding service as a researcher to ageing and aged care issues. Welcome, John. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Emma Bennison. So Emma serves on the executive management team of Life Without Barriers, which is an organisation delivering a range of services, including NDIS, child and family, and home care. And her role is as the Chief Innovation Officer. In this role, Emma advocates strongly for disability and community services delivery across the organisation and beyond. Emma also has over 20 years' experience as a CEO and non-executive director. Prior to commencing her current role, Emma fulfilled 5 years as CEO of Blind Citizens Australia, During her tenure, Emma worked closely with blind and vision impaired people over the age of 65 to advocate for equity of access to supports between My Aged Care and the NDIS. Emma chairs the Attitude Foundation, which is shaping a new understanding of disability through the promotion and development of media content that provides realistic portrayals of people with disability. She also serves on Tasmania's Ministerial Arts and Cultural Advisory Council. And in 2004, Emma co-founded the organisation United Blind Leaders. Last but certainly not least, Emma in 2020 won the National Aspire Award for Community Development and Advocacy and was the recipient of a full MBA scholarship for outstanding not-for-profit leaders from the Australian Scholarships Foundation and the Kaplan Business School. Emma, welcome to the webinar. And last but not least, Sharon Blackburn. So Sharon joined Ballycara's executive team in March 2019. So Ballycara is a Brisbane-based provider delivering retirement living, residential aged care and home care. Sharon has held several executive leadership roles within for-profit, charity housing and not-for-profit organisations. Sharon is a change agent and has a breadth and depth of experience spanning 45 years in health and social care. She is committed to helping people and organisations be the change that they want to see. Sharon has extensive experience serving on international boards. She is a skills speaker and has presented at national and international events. And in 2016 was awarded a CBE in the New Year's Honours for services to nursing and the not-for-profit sector. So welcome, Sharon, and thank you to all three panellists for joining us today. I'm super keen to get into our question and answer session with each of you and looking forward to hearing your perspectives. So to start off with, really interested to understand, what does partnering with older people mean to each of you? And conscious that given your backgrounds, that might be quite different. So John, I might start with you if that's okay, and then go to Emma and then finally Sharon.
So a partner is somebody you trust and can work with or can partner with. And I think it's a very interesting word to use in terms of the last phases of life, particularly. So where some people are not able to deal with that because of mental health issues and other areas. So it has to be something that's sort of mirrored by others, I think, in those cases. But what we know from a lot of work that we've done and recently is that when people go into aged care, particularly into residential care, they want life to be as homely as possible, which means that that partnership is sort of something that's relative to something that would be experienced in the home. When we get to the bigger sphere of care at home, then that's sort of, there's lots of intermediaries there in terms of partnering. So I think that's a different category.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Emma, keen for your insights.
Sure. I think partnering with older people is really about trying to make sure that we meet people where they're at. And, recognising that everybody has had a different life experience, comes from a different perspective. So actually building those relationships, and one of Life Without Barriers' key values is relationships. And so I think from our perspective, we're always about building those relationships, starting those conversations with older people and the people who are around them, and trying to make sure that wherever we can, it's an equal partnership. And partnership is actually about building those relationships so that people feel confident and safe and comfortable sharing really deep, intimate kind of details with us, so that we can provide the best possible level of care, but also recognizing that people want to, particularly if they're still in their own home, maintain autonomy and agency. And, it's our job to help them do that, not to actually take those opportunities away from them. And so I think from our perspective, it's about, meeting people where they're at, and also that sharing of responsibility. So it's not about taking something away, it's about sharing that responsibility and trying to make sure that people have opportunities to exercise their own agency and autonomy, as I said.
Fantastic. And Sharon, interested in your thoughts?
Well, my colleagues have mentioned some useful words, things like trust and relationship. Here at Ballycara, everything we try to do is having a major impact through relationships. And you can ask, well, what does that look like? For me, when we talk about partnering, it's about enabling any person that we work with to have voice, choice and control. And I think that in terms of any service that's being used, all of us in life are consumers. And when we think about it from that perspective, I think we actually get an insight into ourselves and to others about what we're looking for from an outcome, and having a voice and having some control and having choice in that mix. So for me, those are three key elements in terms of having a trusting relationship, as John has mentioned, but really getting alongside the person and not doing for, but doing with, and understanding what their terms of the engagement are, not just what we want to achieve or what outcomes we're seeking. They have to be outcomes for the person that are meaningful.
Fantastic. So, Sharon, I might stick with you, but just keen to understand, how does that then link into potentially delivering better quality and safe care?
I think from a relationship point of view, it's understanding what the person is hoping to achieve for themselves. By the time people work with us and use our services, yes, there will be some acute episodes of ill health, but by and large, people may be living with multiple complex care needs. And they, in that vein, people will know themselves and know how they have adapted and adopted things to get the best outcomes for them. And what we're doing is coming alongside and understanding what that looks like for them, and then how we can enhance so that they have an enhanced quality of life and experience. And not just a quality of care experience, but it's about living well as well in the context of whatever situations they're experiencing. And that can be in their own home, or it can be in a retirement village, it can be in residential care. And I think that those listening to the person and really engaging and seeing what outcomes, not just outputs from our perspective, which can be very clinical focused and very care focused and can minimize the person. I think it's really understanding the whole person's life experience. And within Ballycara, one of the ways that we've done that, we do have many ways of engaging with people, but one of the things we have is a group called Experts by Experience, because we really value that people are experts around themselves. We can add our clinical care wealth of professional knowledge to the mix, but actually they also know themselves. And if they're not able to articulate that, then hopefully their advocates, family and significant others can work with us and the person and get the outcomes that are required.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sharon, for those insights. And I'll come back to your Experts by Experience. We've got a great audience question which ties into that. But just before we do that, Emma, I was keen to get your perspective in terms of what is the value of creating partnerships with consumers or with people that are receiving services. And from your perspective, and love to have some examples about how does this potentially lead to a deeper and more inclusive understanding about how we deliver quality and safe care?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely can lead to, a superior level of service. And, I think, when you actually start, for example, talking directly with individuals or with their families and, actually hearing just about, as Sharon said, the the outcomes that we would see as outcomes or outputs, but what people actually need, which might actually be quite different to what we anticipate, then that leads to a better quality of service. I think the other really important thing that we experience is that it's not ever going to be a one size fits all. And that's where the relationship building is so important. You actually need to, sit down and have conversations with people about, what they need and what they would like. I mean, I can recall, particularly when I was working at Blind Citizens Australia, talking to so many people who would say things to me like, oh, well, I'm over 65. And so, my aged care provider just assumes that all I want to do is sit around and read talking books all day, which I'm sure was none of you in this webinar. But what I actually want to do is get out and volunteer in my community. Now, that's not something that everybody who is aging can do. But for some people, they still want to be active contributors. And sometimes I think, the value of actually partnering with people is that we can give people that dignity of risk, which we talk about in the disability space and have done for years, that rather than sort of assuming that when you cross that line of turning 65, you've suddenly become sort of, useless and put on the sidelines, that we could actually capitalise on the huge contribution that people over 65 can make to our society. I mean, there's wisdom, there's knowledge, there's all of those wonderful benefits that we get. So it's not just a benefit to the individual, it's a benefit to broader society if we can get people, as independent and autonomous and involved as they want to be. I mean, if somebody wants to sit around reading books all day, that sounds like a wonderful thing to do from my perspective too. But, not everybody wants to do that. So we need to, as I said before, meet people where they're at and give them that dignity to be able to make those choices.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. John, keen to come to you, and we've talked very much about individual older people, but obviously it is a very complex in terms of aged care. Where do families sit and how do they need to be involved as part of this conversation?
I guess it depends on the functionality of the individual we're talking about, and families play a big role typically, not always, but typically play a big role. So when we're talking about partnering, it's not just the older person necessarily. When we're looking at people who have really high care needs, it's the whole family. And I guess that raises a lot of different points of view that come into play. And how to get that partnering going is something that I think can be done, but does require a lot of skill, a lot of emotional abilities. And then I guess the functionality is really critical, particularly if we're thinking at home care where people just want to be what they are, and there's only a light touch there. So that's a little bit of a difference. So just thinking through, it's quite a different array of things we have to think about in partnering.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. I might stick with you, but I'm going to actually ask this question of all three of you. How do you ensure that there are appropriate avenues for older people and their families to contribute to the continuous improvement and sustainability of aged care? So any preliminary thoughts, John?
So I think assuming that the people are able to do that and or have fair and good supporters, then that's when the engagement, I guess the partnering is really critical. And that's understanding what people want and need, as we were hearing from Emma, and so that people can really engage and just have that feeling that they're in partnership. This is not an object that we're dealing with. It's a person, and it has that sort of home care family. So I think that's something that I can hear coming through some of the talk from people running care here.
Fantastic. Emma, keen to hear from you about what are some of the ways that you have used Life Without Barriers and Blind Citizens Australia as appropriate avenues for older people and or other people that are accessing care to contribute to make sure that their voices are heard? I'm just conscious Emma has just disappeared. So Sharon, I'm not sure if you heard that question, but are you happy to jump in with a response?
Yeah, I can jump in. Well, hopefully Emma will come back soon. I think there's a variety of ways. I think from the moment that you are engaging with a person and their significant others, families or friends, it's about building the bridges and building the blocks to have a really good, trusted relationship where the things that we've spoken about the outcomes, but whether that's then what their engagement looks like on an ongoing basis, and whether that's one-to-one, whether it's participating as groups. There's lots of different ways to elicit people's views and feedback that are done by multiple providers, multiple times over, I think, on every day, from decisions that can impact the individual, but also decisions, particularly if somebody's living in residential care, that can have an impact on the wider community and can bring benefit to the wider community. And that can be anything from menus, from deciding what they want to do with their time, how they want to spend their time, how you operate a service, what the environment looks and feels like. I think there's multiple layers, and I think those conversations go on all the time, but I don't think we always add meaning and value to that engagement. We just see it as being the norm. And I think obviously now that partnering and this whole concept of having much greater visible engagement with older people, I think it's really important both for the individual and their families, but also for providers to think about how they can elevate that and evidence and demonstrate that actually this is not necessarily new. We've been doing this for a long time, but we haven't always had to evidence in the way that we're being required to now. And in terms of the level of how it runs through the organisation, so it's not always just at service level, but right through to board and, affecting and impacting the governance of an organisation, and making sure that we don't minimalise people's contributions, however small, that we actively listen and engage and consider. And I think, like any relationship, it's two-way. You have to give feedback. It's not just a one-way street, or, can we have your ideas, please? Or can you tell us about this? But it's also about ensuring that we're giving meaningful feedback. And I think I'm just going to throw another sort of thought into the conversation. It's also about how we manage expectations, especially when we do live in community and people have moved from being in their own homes, and what we can do and some things that we may not be able to do, and that will differ. And being innovative and creative about trying to achieve the outcomes for the person in a way that's meaningful to them. But it's recognising that we can't do all things for all people all the time. So I hope that addresses some of the things, Nicki, that you were looking for.
It does, Sharon. I am keen to do a deep dive on some of what you have said. But before we do that, I do want to cut through to an audience question, which I think is very timely given what you have just said. So thanks very much for the question. The question is, what can be enabled that will guide providers to set consumer advisory bodies or other bodies that without the provider chairing and, I think most importantly, controlling that group? So any tips or suggestions, Sharon, from your experience?
I think it goes back to those multiple levels of points of contact. So in the different environments and different settings, there may be one-to-one meetings, there may be small cohorts of people to come together, small households. If it's in residential care, you can do all the normal surveys, telephone follow-ups, meetings, and all of those sort of things. At Ballycara, we have got multiple levels of engagement, but we also do have an experts by experience group that was set up actually 5 years ago. So it predates all the legislation that has now come through, but it's still well established, and it has representatives of people who use our services from across the whole organisation. So including people that live in our village, as well as people who use more regulated services. And that isn't chaired. It is chaired by a member of staff, but it's chaired by our creative and engagement therapist, who is an art therapist by background. And she is a really skilled facilitator, but has worked with a number of the people as well, and really has a trusting relationship with them. And it is run independently in that sense, whereas and the group is used, and it's taken time to establish, but it's used to have discussions about the organisation. And so we went through a journey of people bringing their experience to the table, and being focused on their experience, and then to elevating that and using that personal experience to the benefit of a wider group of people and then to the organisation. So it has a terms of reference, there are terms of office. Obviously, any person can, for whatever reason, can stop being part of it, and because their needs change, and then we recruit other people. But it's become a really good way. That group has access to our board engage with the group. I can't say that we've got it all perfect yet. It's still a work in progress, because we want any interaction with our board and with other key leaders in the organisation to be meaningful, not just tokenistic. So we use a range of mechanisms, but that group has become really important to us as an organisation. For example, we're just about to go through a review of our 5-year strategy, and we are starting with that group. And they're going to be our starting point before we have our strategic away day. And some of our board members will be there to participate and engage. So, yeah, we've not arrived, but I think we're making good inroads into having what I would call meaningful engagement. And the feedback we get from them is that they feel that their voices are heard and considered.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sharon. I love that in terms of we haven't arrived, but we're in progress. I think that is good words for everyone to hear, but likewise is really interesting to be able to hear the steps you've taken, and particularly about having, whilst not completely independent, but someone that knows the residents, that's skilled facilitator, but has that trusted relationship, and how you utilise that to actually really engage with that experts in expert by experience. John, can I just come to you in terms of, have you got any thoughts or tips or tricks around how you can, I guess, break that nexus between providers setting and, I guess, chairing and controlling the consumer advisory body, or in fairness, those consumer interactions?
Could I start with just a couple of barriers to that, if I may, not to be
absolutely
negative? Listening to ABC Sydney a few weeks back, they were talking to somebody about an aged care issue, and at the end of it, I mean, I was driving the car and I was just paying little attention to that. At the end of it, the presenter said, well, you know, they've done nothing about aged care. And I nearly fell out of the car, really, because there's been an enormous Royal Commission and so much change going on. The reality is that most people have no idea of that. So that's something you have to deal with. People come in with if you like, the sins of the past in their minds, and you have to deal with that. The other one is that we're now, because of all that change, we're having a lot of complexity and change that we're going to go through probably from the beginning of next year, but beginning this year as well. So that's very disturbing, and what sort of care you're getting, what changes are going. So I'm just presenting some barriers we have to work through that are really present at the time. I might stop there and not to take too much time.
Fantastic, and welcome back, Emma. We've got you reconnected. Emma, I'm really interested in your thoughts, and particularly some of the journey that you've had with Life Without Barriers around how do you ensure that there are appropriate avenues and mechanisms for people within that are supported by Life Without Barriers to contribute their viewpoints within your organisation, and keen for some of the practical examples as well.
Sure. So from a broad perspective, we have been on this journey for about 12 months or more now, where we have been very intentional about making sure that lived experience is really a major kind of driver of what we do. And worked through some processes as an organisation. Like, we've done some research about, how other organisations in the human services area have embedded lived experience. We've looked at our own approach as an organisation. We've developed a vision for how we will work and partner with people in terms of lived experience. And then alongside all of that, we've got within each of our directorates a whole lot of work going on that is already starting to move us in this direction. So what we're looking at organisationally is about, how does our board reflect lived experience? How do our employees reflect the lived experience of the people we support? How do we make sure that lived experience is part of every single piece of decision-making work that we do as an organisation, right from the top, right down to the grassroots? So that's actually a really significant undertaking when you consider we've got 8,000 employees, and a massive client cohort, and also we've got foster carers and all sorts of other groups of people that we work with. So it's a huge undertaking. But one of the things, particularly in the aged care space, that we've noticed is that we've started surveying people over the past sort of 5 or 6 years about what they would like and what they want from our services and those sorts of things. And over the time that we've been doing that, we've noticed a real uptick in people's engagement, because they are recognising that not only are we asking for their opinion, but we're reporting back to them on what we're finding. And we're also, inviting them to be part of our reference groups and focus groups and those sorts of things. So that is having a real impact. And, in our most recent survey, we've got about 5,500 clients, and we had a response rate of about 1,800. And of those, I think it was 300 of those people expressed interest in joining our reference group. Now, I'm someone who's been involved in, member-based advocacy organisations for most of my career, and from my perspective, that's a huge response rate by, any stretch of the imagination. And so I think that really is, testament to the relationships that the carers and the staff are building, that really invite people in and really want those people's opinions, and we genuinely value them. And as I said, we report back to those people. And I think that's really important, because so many times, I know in my personal experience, I get surveyed constantly and I very rarely, hear what happens to that data or what difference is actually made for anybody. So I think that's a really good example of how we're trying to be real about this.
Fantastic. I love that. I think particularly, and it also lines up while you were offline with some of what Sharon was saying about being that culture of inviting people in. But I think also Sharon was talking about managing expectations and being clear, but that closing the loop, reporting back, making sure, as you say, that information doesn't go off and then people don't understand where it's gone to or what has or hasn't been done. It seems absolutely critical in terms of engagement.
Yeah. Yep.
Fantastic. I've got another question. This is very specific. So, Sharon, I'm going to come to you on this because I think it would be potentially slightly unfair to potentially put this to John or Emma. We've got a question around, obviously, we have a whole range of new reforms around care within the home, and particularly around support at home. So I think the question from the audience is really what might partnering within home care look like under support at home? And does it actually look any different to now?
I would ask the question, why would it look different? What would regulation and a change in program do to that fundamental relationship that you have with a person who's chosen to use your service as a provider, than what you do now? Everything we've said so far on this discussion is about building that relationship, understanding what the person wants to achieve for themselves. Now, obviously, there's going to be the intention of the new support at home program is that there is greater choice and greater control for the individual. And it's our job as a provider to understand what role we play in that, in partnering with them, in very much the same way we do now, what they do and the processes and systems that surround all of that. But in terms of actually a provision of a service, unless I'm being really naive, and we haven't got all the detail of the program yet, but in terms of the outcomes for the individual, at this point in time, and I'm open to any person listening to correct me in the chat or in questions, but I don't see fundamentally us working different, the systems and the processes, how money is managed, what happens, but actually in terms of partnering with the person and achieving the outcomes that they want to achieve and understanding our role in helping them to achieve that shouldn't change, because it's all predicated on that relationship and understanding them. But if I'm missing the question, Nicki, please tell me, and I will do my best to regroup.
No, Sharon, I don't think you're missing the question at all. And I think if I was going to answer the question, that is how I'd answer it, because I think everything we've talked about to now, up to now, in terms of building that partnership, building relationships, having that reporting back, being that culture of inviting people in, none of that should change dependent on the program. Like, the program is a function of, I guess, your funding, and there's a range of guidelines, but I don't think it changes anything that we've been talking about. Emma, keen for your viewpoint around that, because obviously Life Without Barriers delivers a range of programs across a range of different areas. Does it matter if it's does it matter about the funding or the program or the policy in terms of how you partner with the consumers of those services?
Well, I'd like to say it doesn't, and it shouldn't, but I've been around too long to say that, because as a recipient of services as well, I've been around too long to say that. Of course, it's going to potentially have an impact if organisations are struggling for funding, or if policy change is causing a whole heap of extra bureaucracy. I'm not saying any of that's going to happen as a result of these changes. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I guess I'm being realistic in saying that partnering, sometimes it's the first thing to suffer when policy changes, because people get very fixated on regulation and policy and funding and all of those things, understandably, because you have to, run an organisation. But the reality is that what we need to do when these sorts of changes occur is we need to get more and more laser focused on actually building those relationships and partnerships, because they are the things that are going to see us through. They are the cornerstone. They are the backbone. Funding comes and goes, policy changes, regulation changes, things happen. We've all been around for long enough to know that that's the case. You've got to be able to stay the course on building those relationships and continuing to put people in the driving seat, not just at the centre, but in the driving seat of their own lives. Because when you do that, the policy change, the regulation, the uncertainty, all of that is still there, but it's where it belongs, and that's in the background. Because what we want to be focused on is what the person that we're supporting actually experiences, and what we want them to experience is great service. And so from my perspective, that's where it always has to be. That's where we always have to be thinking. And I think we can, and I think lots of organisations do that really well. I'm not suggesting it doesn't happen, but I think there's a real danger in getting sucked into the rabbit hole. And sometimes I think that's what is intended, that we'll get sucked into this rabbit hole and kind of forget that what we're really here for is people. So if we can keep that focus, I think, so much the better.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. I love that. What we are really here for are people. John, your thoughts? You've seen a number of reforms and changes. Any thoughts about the impact and how we should consider that in terms of partnering?
I'm a happy baby boomer, and I think baby boomers are coming in with a very different, as they get off their cruise and actually go and need care. they come in with their own mindset. They're not going to sort of lie down and take things unless they're unable to do that. So that's a very interesting opportunity now to be able to get that partnering going, so people are equal, if you like, and can drive things the way they want. So I think that's an opportunity now that's coming. Also, we are going to go through significant change as we go through the next couple of years. And there's another opportunity for the providers to be the people who are able to explain what's going on, because as I mentioned earlier, half the world still thinks that aged care is what it was 20 years ago, and it isn't. And it is a major part of the care economy, the monetised care economy, and it's a business, and it has boards and it has all sorts of responsibilities. But also, if they can get that provider thing to help clients with information that's accurate, I think that'll be another asset in terms of providing that, I guess, care and opportunities for people to get exactly what they want.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. We have got some fantastic audience questions coming through. So I have another one which I'm going to come to Sharon on. What are the soft skills needed by staff to support better partnering with consumers? Great question.
Fantastic question. And I'm going to weave in just another brief statement is around taking the opportunity. Everybody's mentioned all the changes that are happening and all the reforms. And it's thinking about how each organisation responds to those reforms and how they do it in a way that fits with their purpose, their why, and their values. And that leads into then getting the right people to do the right thing at the right time in the right way for the people that we are serving, that we are working with, that choose to utilise and choose us as a provider. And there's been some research done over many years by some different countries, but what it's really interesting is that at the heart of it is that people who use services expect, if people hold a qualification or do some learning and training, they almost by default, which shouldn't perhaps be a default, but also almost expect competence. So if they say they're a registered nurse, they expect that person to be a registered nurse and perform within the competence. But for the soft skills and for the things that matter to the person, and what's meaningful to them is, will I be valued? Will I be heard? Will I be treated with kindness? Will the person that comes and walks and talks and enables me, will they be curious about who I am? Will they take time with me, or will they rush me? Will they be compassionate? Will they know how to actively listen and really be able to reflect back and engage with me on a meaningful level? I think it's really important. Organisations, we have values, but those values have to be lived and walked and talked and breathed. And they have to have real life put into them. And for us as an organisation, when we look at our values, we've looked at what behaviours are attached to those values, but more importantly, it's how those values aren't behaviours, but how they're experienced by the person. Whether that's a person using our service, whether it's a colleague, whether it's our own staff between themselves, it's really important that they are lived and are meaningful, and that we get feedback on that. There are ways of engaging people who use our services in interviewing staff and selecting their staff. And indeed, we know that there are platforms out there where people can go and choose who their carer is, and that will, I'm sure, grow over the coming months and years to come. But I think it's really important that people have a say and look for those soft skills. It's our job to make sure that when we're interviewing and recruiting, that those are given equal importance to all the competence and the character skills. It is about that chemistry as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharon, for those insights. Emma, I've got another audience question, which I'm hoping, well, interested to see if you have any insights from the fantastic work you're doing at Life Without Barriers. Any thoughts or tips around how do we support participation of people from diverse backgrounds, including migrant and refugee backgrounds, or other diverse backgrounds within consumer bodies?
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is make sure that your workforce actually mirrors the diversity of the people that you support, because that is a really good way of making sure that there is that level of understanding within your workforce, and also that the people you support can actually see themselves reflected back through your workforce. And that starts from boards all the way down, of course. I think the other really important area is to make sure that when you're working with individuals, that you don't make assumptions about, for example, how they might best want to receive information, or how they might want to have a conversation, or what they might need. So making sure that diversity is actually part of that conversation, and that you're actually having a conversation. And as I agree with absolutely everything that Sharon just said about, deep listening and curiosity and all of those really important aspects that will enable people to be empowered, if they want to actually talk about their diversity or bring forward their diversity in a conversation. So rather than it being, another problem that has to be solved, it can again be seen as an asset and an advantage, and a way of actually thinking differently about how services are delivered. A really simple example of it is, when we put out our surveys, we make sure that there are multiple entry points for people to be able to complete that survey, for example. That's a really simple example, but, for example, making sure that people can pick up the phone and call someone to complete the survey if they don't want to complete it in writing, making sure that it's available electronically but also on paper. So those are really simple examples, but if we can start to think about always having multiple entry points for people to find a way into those conversations. And I think also just making sure that we recognise that sometimes diversity is new for people. So, for example, oftentimes when people are ageing, they are acquiring disability, for example, or they might be, a migrant at the same time. So, it's making sure that we recognise that people are on an adjustment journey sometimes too, and recognising that people may not even know what they need or know what to ask for. And again, it's being able to ask really curious questions and have really deep conversations that bring those things out for people in a way that makes them feel empowered, not as if they're a burden.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. Once again, back to the curious questions and the deep listening. And I also like that concept about multiple entry points. So there's almost no wrong way to be able to engage. It's about having options in terms of how that can occur. John, question for you. Any thoughts about how organisations can maintain effective governance and decision-making processes while actively incorporating and valuing input from older people?
Well, if I put myself in a chair around the board, sitting at the table, I'm there under law, really, that I have to be careful about hiring, forecasting, perhaps fundraising, and abiding by the laws and by the Commission's boundaries as well. So coming into that, I think that we can rely on this sort of approach to it be one of the ways that you can deliver those services in terms of governance and decision making. You're building in the partnering into those areas so that you've got that in the culture and in the sort of work training that we do, so that it takes us back into some deep areas of training and recruiting people who are able to do these things as well. So I think, this is what we're talking about. What I'm saying is it's good for business. It's something that's appropriately should be discussed on the board by people and thought through and monitored and cared for.
Fantastic. Thank you, John, for those insights.
Can I add something? Can
Absolutely,
I add something
Emma.
to that, Nicki? I was just going to say that I get really concerned sometimes that there's a tendency, and it particularly seems to happen with people with significant governance expertise, to assume that lived experience and governance expertise are mutually exclusive. And I think it's really important that we recognise that they are not necessarily. So people can have, significant lived experience, but they may also have extraordinary governance acumen. They may have worked in business for the last 50 years and be able to bring that experience to the table alongside their personal lived experience, whether that be as a person who is ageing or as a family member. So I get really worried when I hear governance experts say, well, we can't have people with lived experience on boards because they don't have the governance expertise. Well, that's sometimes, but not always true. So I just think we have to be careful to not kind of pigeonhole people.
No, I think that's a really great point, Emma, and thank you for making that and ensuring that that's visible. I'm conscious that we're starting to run out of time, and I'm really keen to get to my last question, which is around 3 practical ways to be able to promote and implement partnering with older people in a valuable way. I'm super keen to get insights from each of our 3 panellists. John, can I start with you, and then I'll come to Emma and then Sharon.
So mine's a bit high level, if that's all right. I think that we're looking at a care economy. It's aged care as a business as well as a carer service, and I think that as we go into the future, we're going to have more and more people of my generation, the baby boomers, coming through, and people who can pay for things. So if we embed the right sort of culture to this, and that is good for business, looking at the other way and looking at perhaps from the way a board would look at it. So I would back that one myself.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Emma, interested in your thoughts in terms of 3 most practical ways to promote and implement partnering with older people in a valuable way.
Yeah, I think I agree with John entirely. I think making sure that it's culturally embedded and embedded right from the board down, making sure that there is that recognition that doing this is not just a warm, fuzzy, nice thing to do, that it actually makes good business sense. It will ultimately result in better services and more satisfied clients. And I think the third thing is a point that I touched on before about employment. And even though, you might say, well, older people are over the age of retirement, that's true, but there are so many ways to engage people meaningfully, as I said before, in boards, in advisory groups, whatever the case may be. But actually leveraging their previous skill sets as well as their current lived experience, I think is just such a sometimes a missed opportunity. So I think it's fantastic if we can do that as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for those insights, Emma. Sharon, I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Gosh, building on 2 excellent answers. I would say start. If you haven't started or you haven't recognised, start. And look at what you do. And I would say that for people who are providers of services, really ask the question, why are you doing it? Because actually, if we don't have people who choose to use our services, what is the purpose if we're not looking to make a difference in somebody's life? And so for me, that says, actually, there's nothing about me without me. And actually, if we don't include the voice of the person using the services and their lived experience and use it to shape and inform what we and bring it into that big mix of everything that's happening around us regarding governance and reform and all the various regulations, not just the Aged Care Quality Commission regulations. As an organisation, you have multiple layers of regulation to meet. the voice of the person has to be central to what we do and really direct and understand our purpose. So how we do that: start, manage expectations, and just saying, building on what Emma has said about recognise and value people's expertise and lived experience, not only of their health and care needs, but of their life, and bring that experience to the table. And just a quick example, very quick. When we did our last strategy on our Experts by Experience group, somebody with multiple years experience of working in business really pulled me up in the most positive of ways and said to me, don't use any jargon, will you? I don't want to see the management jargon. Make sure it's really accessible. And they really kept me to my word. And it's so easy to stray, but they kept me on track and kept me to their word, so that what we came up with was something that was acceptable to all people. So start your journey and have fun along the way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharon. I particularly like to have fun, because I think that's part of it. Is it's not a linear journey. It is hard, but I think it's important to have fun and to be able to enjoy those moments that you have along that journey. Can I just say a very big thank you to everyone for joining us today? We're at the formal end of the webinar. That's been a fantastic discussion at my end, and certainly I've taken a lot away from it. I think for me, some of the really key points are, and I'm finishing up with what Sharon said, in terms of looking at people's experience and the fact that they've got expertise. In fact, it was Emma, I think, about expertise in lived experience in their own life. I think that's an incredibly important concept. Going back to the beginning, I think the concept about trying to meet people where they are at is also incredibly important, and about how this is not just about hearing the voice of older people, but it's about building relationships, and it's about building those relationships in a trusted way, and that there's multiple different ways to do that. And we've heard some of the different ways from John, from Emma, and from Sharon today. So thank you very much for your insights. I think the other thing for me, which is incredibly important, is also around that having a culture of inviting people in and inviting voices in, but making sure that we're doing that in multiple different ways. There's not one way to be able to do that. It's multiple, and it's important that that door is very much open, and also that we're also coming back to making sure that we report back, and that people's voices aren't just taken and then they don't hear back about what has happened to that information. So in terms of today's event, following today's event, we will send you an email with a link to provide feedback. So please take the time to do this, as it's very valuable for us to be able to hear from you, our audience. As mentioned earlier, to view more information about the program, or to access all learning materials, please visit the link on screen so you can access some of the related learning activities that are shared on the screen. And a reminder, the reminder email will also contain those links to enable you to be able to click through to what you might be interested in terms of engaging with from a learning activity perspective. Please feel free to share the post-webinar content and also the video of the webinar with your network. A recording of the webinar will be made available to you in the email that you will receive after the event. Thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that has been valuable, and there's been some great insights that you're able to take away and use within your organisations. So thank you for joining us.